It started with the little things. A late night here, a curt response there. At first, I didn't want to see it. I told myself it was work stress, or that I was imagining things. Claire was my wife, the woman I had chosen to spend my life with. Surely, there had to be an explanation. I sat in my home office that evening, staring at a framed photo from our wedding day. Claire's radiant smile, the way her hand rested on mine. It used to feel real, but lately, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything we had built was slipping through my fingers. The sound of the front door opening snapped me out of my thoughts. I turned in my chair as Claire walked in, tossing her bag onto the couch with an air of exhaustion. "You're home early," I said, forcing a smile. She didn't look at me, heading straight for the kitchen. "Yeah, work's been a nightmare. I just want to shower and sleep." I followed her, leaning against the counter as she poured herself a glass of wine. "Maybe we could order in tonight? Spend some time together?" She sighed, her shoulders slumping. "Look, I've had a long day. Can we not do this right now?" Her words stung, but I kept my voice calm. "I'm just trying to help, Claire. We haven't had dinner together in weeks." I thought. "You thought what?" she snapped, finally meeting my gaze. "That I don't have enough on my plate already? You're always hovering, always needing something. I can't breathe." I stood there, stunned. Her words were like a slap to the face. Before I could respond, she grabbed her glass and stormed out of the kitchen. The sound of the bathroom door slamming shut echoed through the house. I stayed rooted in place, replaying the argument in my head. It wasn't the first time we had fought like this, but something about her tone, her choice of words, felt different. When her phone buzzed on the counter, I glanced at it instinctively. Claire had always been protective of her phone, keeping it locked and face down. Tonight, though, she had left it unlocked in her rush to shower. The screen lit up with a notification. "Message from Ryan. I can't stop thinking about last night. Can't wait to see you again." My stomach twisted into a knot. Ryan. The name was unfamiliar, but the context was clear. I picked up the phone, my hands trembling as I scrolled through the conversation. The texts were explicit, filled with inside jokes, flirtations, and promises. My chest tightened with every word, the weight of her betrayal crushing me. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was proof. I put the phone down carefully, as though it might explode if I wasn't gentle. My mind raced, torn between anger, heartbreak, and disbelief. When Claire emerged from the bathroom, her hair wrapped in a towel, I had already returned to my office. I couldn't face her, not yet. She poked her head in, her tone softer now. "I'm going to bed. Good night." "Good night," I replied without looking up. As soon as I heard the bedroom door close, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, staring at the wedding photo on my desk. The man in that picture had no idea what was coming. He had believed in a future that was now unraveling before his eyes. I wanted to storm into the bedroom, demand answers, yell, cry. Anything to release the storm brewing inside me. But I knew it wouldn't help. Claire had lied to me, and confronting her in the heat of the moment wouldn't change that. Instead, I focused on the one thing I could control, my response. If Claire thought I would sit quietly and let this betrayal define me, she was wrong. She had shattered my trust, but she hadn't broken me. I didn't know how yet, but I would take back control of my life, piece by piece. And as the first rays of sunlight crept through the blinds, I made a vow to myself. This was the beginning of the end for our marriage. But it was also the start of something new. The morning after my discovery, I sat in the kitchen nursing a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The message from Ryan still played in my mind like a broken record, each word etching itself deeper into my memory. Claire came downstairs, her hair still damp from her shower, and flashed me a smile. It was a hollow expression, one that used to make me feel loved, but now only served as a reminder of her betrayal. "Heading out early today?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Yeah," she replied, grabbing her keys. "Lots to do. I'll see you tonight." As the door closed behind her, I exhaled slowly. She had no idea that her carefully constructed facade was crumbling. I needed answers. Ryan was no longer just a name on her phone. He was a problem that needed solving. But I couldn't approach this emotionally. If I acted impulsively, I risked giving her the upper hand. That's when I decided to call Alan, a private investigator I'd met years ago through a mutual friend. Marcus, Alan greeted me warmly when he picked up. Been a while. What's going on? I need your help, I said, keeping my tone steady. It's personal. Alan didn't need much convincing. Within the hour, we had a plan in place. He would follow Claire, document her movements, and gather whatever evidence he could of her infidelity. Be thorough, I told him. I need everything. For the next few days, I played the role of the oblivious husband. I went to work, made dinner, and even suggested a movie night. Claire, for her part, seemed unbothered. If anything, she was more distant than usual. The first major clue came when I noticed a charge on our joint credit card for a luxury hotel downtown. Claire had mentioned a work meeting that day, but the time and location didn't match up. It was a small piece of the puzzle, but it was enough to confirm my suspicions. Alan's updates came regularly. He trailed Claire to a series of restaurants, hotels, and parks, snapping photos of her with Ryan. They were careful, but not careful enough. Alan captured them holding hands, sharing private moments, and even kissing in the parking lot of a hotel. When Alan handed me the envelope of photos and the detailed report, my chest tightened. Seeing the evidence laid out so clearly was like a punch to the gut. Do you want me to keep digging? Alan asked. Yes, I said without hesitation. I need everything. Who he is, what he does, and anything else you can find. Over the next few days, Alan uncovered more about Ryan. He was a wealthy client of Claire's firm, a man with a reputation for extravagance and a history of bad decisions, gambling debts, failed business ventures, and even a pending lawsuit. The more I learned about him, the more I realized Claire wasn't just having an affair. She was entangling herself with someone dangerous. With Alan's help, I began documenting every interaction Claire had with Ryan. I compiled screenshots of their text exchanges, photos of their meetings, and receipts from the hotels and restaurants they frequented. Each piece of evidence added another layer to the case I was building against her. But I wasn't just gathering proof of her infidelity. I was also preparing for the financial fallout. I met with my lawyer, Nathan, who helped me set up a personal account and transfer half of our savings into it. I canceled the joint credit cards and rerouted all my income to the new account. You're being smart about this, Nathan said as we went over the details. By the time she realizes what's happening, it'll be too late for her to contest anything. That's the goal, I replied. At night, I would sit in my office and review the evidence, the ache in my chest slowly giving way to a cold, steely resolve. Claire thought she had me fooled, but I wasn't the naive husband she assumed I was. The hardest part was pretending everything was normal. There were moments when I wanted to confront her, to throw the photos and texts in her face and demand answers. But I knew that timing was everything. If I acted too soon, I'd lose the advantage. One evening, as Claire sat across from me at the dinner table, scrolling through her phone, I asked casually, "How's work been?" She barely looked up. "Busy. You know how it is." "Yeah," I said, my voice calm. "It must be exhausting keeping up with everything." Her eyes flicked to mine, a brief flash of unease crossing her face. "What do you mean?" I shrugged. "Just that you've been working so hard lately. It must be stressful." Claire didn't respond, but I could tell my words had unsettled her. Good. That night, as she slept soundly beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing with plans. The pieces were falling into place. Soon, I would have everything I needed to confront her. And when that moment came, there would be no escaping the truth. The days that followed were a masterclass in restraint. Every morning, I woke up next to a woman I no longer recognized, her betrayal a constant shadow in the room. Yet, I kept my composure. If Claire noticed the shift in my demeanor, she didn't let on. She moved through our home like nothing was wrong, texting Ryan, planning her work trips, and occasionally throwing me a half-hearted smile. The charade would have been amusing if it weren't so infuriating. I spent those weeks fine-tuning my plan. Every move had to be precise, every word carefully chosen. Confronting Claire too soon would only give her a chance to twist the narrative. I needed her to think she was in control until the very last second. To give her space, And to further cement my role as the oblivious husband, I suggested a weekend getaway. "You've been working so hard," I said over dinner one night. "Why don't we take a trip? Just the two of us. A change of scenery might do us some good." Claire hesitated, her fork pausing mid-air. "I don't know, Luke. Work's been crazy lately. I have that conference this weekend." "Of course," I said, nodding. "We can plan something for later. Just let me know when you're free." Her relief was palpable, and I felt a dark sense of satisfaction knowing she thought she had successfully dodged my suggestion. That weekend, while Claire was off at her conference, I spent my time finalizing the pieces of my plan. Alan's latest report revealed even more damning details about Ryan. His gambling debts, his shady business dealings, and the string of lawsuits trailing behind him. This man wasn't just bad news. He was a ticking time bomb. I compiled everything into a neatly organized folder. The photos, the text messages, the financial records, and Alan's detailed timeline of the affair. It was more than enough to confront Claire, and to ensure she couldn't worm her way out of the consequences. But I wasn't done yet. I spent hours researching workplace policies at Claire's company, noting the strict rules about personal relationships with clients. Her affair with Ryan wasn't just a betrayal of our marriage. It was a direct violation of her employer's code of conduct. By the time Sunday evening rolled around, I had everything I needed. Claire returned home late, her hair slightly disheveled and her makeup smudged. She greeted me with a quick kiss on the cheek, her usual guilt-laced smile firmly in place. "How was the conference?" I asked, handing her a glass of wine. "Exhausting," she replied, sinking into the couch. "Long meetings, boring presentations. You know how it is." I nodded, suppressing the urge to laugh at her audacity. As the week went on, I continued to observe her behavior, taking note of every lie she told and every excuse she made. It was like watching a poorly rehearsed play, the cracks in her performance becoming more obvious with each passing day. One evening, as Claire was packing for yet another business trip, I decided to plant a seed of doubt. "You've been traveling so much lately," I said casually, leaning against the doorway of our bedroom. "I hope your clients appreciate all the effort you're putting in." She glanced at me, her hands pausing over her suitcase. "They do," she said, her tone defensive. "I'm sure they do," I replied with a faint smile. "Just make sure you're not spreading yourself too thin. You wouldn't want anything to slip through the cracks." Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she said nothing. That night, I sat in my office, reviewing my notes and preparing for the confrontation. I had planned every detail, every word. There would be no yelling, no theatrics, just the cold, hard truth. As I closed the folder and leaned back in my chair, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The storm was coming, but I was ready. Claire thought she was in control, that her lies would go unnoticed. But she had underestimated me. The next morning, I kissed her goodbye as she left for work, watching from the window as she drove away. "Enjoy it while it lasts," I murmured to myself, because soon, her perfect little world was going to come crashing down. The day had come. I woke up that morning feeling strangely detached, as though I were watching my life unfold from a distance. It wasn't anger driving me anymore. It was purpose. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, and I wasn't going to let emotions get in the way. Claire arrived home late, as usual. I had made dinner, something simple, a final act of civility before the storm. "Smells good," she said absent-mindedly, dropping her bag on the counter. "Thought we could have a quiet dinner tonight," I replied, keeping my voice steady. She nodded, clearly distracted. As we ate, I studied her, noting the way she avoided eye contact and the occasional glance at her phone. I wondered if she was texting Ryan under the table, oblivious to the fact that her lies were moments away from unraveling. After dinner, I suggested we sit in the living room. She agreed, settling into her usual spot on the couch. "There's something I need to talk to you about," I said, taking a seat across from her. She looked up, her brow furrowing slightly. "What's going on?" I reached over to the side table and pulled out the folder I had meticulously compiled over the past few weeks. I set it on the coffee table between us, the weight of it palpable. "What's this?" she asked, her tone cautious. "Why don't you take a look?" I replied, leaning back in my chair. She hesitated before opening the folder, her fingers trembling slightly as she flipped through the pages. Her face went pale as she took in the photos of her and Ryan, the text message transcripts, the receipts from their hotel stays. "Luke," she began, her voice shaky. "This isn't what it looks like." I let out a bitter laugh. "Isn't it? Because it looks like you've been having an affair with Ryan for the past 6 months." She dropped the folder onto the table, her eyes darting around the room as though searching for an escape. "I can explain," she said weakly. "Go ahead," I said, crossing my arms. "Explain." She opened her mouth, then closed it, clearly struggling to find the words. Finally, she said, "It wasn't supposed to happen. I didn't mean for it to get this far." "Didn't mean for it to get this far?" I repeated, my voice rising slightly. "Claire, you've been lying to me for months, sneaking around, spending our money on him, and making a complete fool out of me. But sure, tell me how you didn't mean for this to happen." She shifted uncomfortably, her face contorted with a mix of guilt and defiance. "You don't understand, Luke. I felt trapped. Our marriage has been suffocating. You're always so focused on your work, on your routines. I needed something more." I stared at her, stunned by the audacity of her words. "So your solution was to betray me? To lie to my face every single day?" She didn't respond, her silence speaking volumes. I stood up, pacing the room as I tried to keep my emotions in check. "Do you even realize what you've done?" I asked, my voice trembling with anger. "You didn't just hurt me, Claire. You destroyed everything we built together. For what? A guy who can't even pay his gambling debts?" Her head snapped up, her eyes wide. "What are you talking about?" I smirked, grabbing another document from the folder and tossing it onto the table. "Ryan's financial records. Did you really think I wouldn't find out about his history of bad decisions? The lawsuits? The debt collectors? This is the man you threw our marriage away for." Claire stared at the document, her face crumbling as the reality of her choices sank in. "I trusted you," I continued, my voice quieter now. "I believed in us, and you repaid me by tearing it all apart." She buried her face in her hands, sobbing. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I don't know what else to say." I stood there, watching her cry, feeling a strange mix of anger and relief. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment she would finally face the consequences of her actions. But it wasn't enough. "This marriage is over," I said firmly. "I've already spoken to a lawyer. The divorce papers are ready, and I'll be filing them tomorrow." Her head shot up, her tear-streaked face filled with panic. "Look, please. We can fix this. I'll end things with Ryan. I'll do whatever it takes." "It's too late," I said, my voice cold and unyielding. "You made your choices, Claire, and now you have to live with them." I turned and walked toward the stairs, pausing at the bottom step. "You can sleep in the guest room tonight. I'll move my things out tomorrow." She didn't respond, her sobs the only sound in the room as I walked upstairs. As I closed the bedroom door behind me, I felt a strange sense of closure. The confrontation was over, but the real work, the process of moving on, was just beginning. The morning after the confrontation, the house felt eerily quiet. Claire hadn't spoken to me since I laid everything out. I heard her moving around downstairs, probably nursing the hangover of her actions. But I didn't care. My focus was now on executing the next phase of my plan, ensuring her betrayal came with consequences. I made a pot of coffee, poured myself a cup, and sat at the kitchen table. My lawyer, Nathan, had already emailed me a finalized copy of the divorce papers. I reviewed them again carefully. They were airtight. Claire would walk away with nothing more than the bare minimum. Every shared asset had been carefully divided, every legal angle covered. I had made sure of it. Claire appeared in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes puffy from crying. "Are you really going to do this, Luke?" she asked, her voice hoarse. I sipped my coffee, meeting her gaze without flinching. "Yes, I am. You can sign the papers, or you can fight me in court. Either way, this marriage is done." She opened her mouth to argue but stopped herself, retreating back upstairs without another word. I turned my attention back to the plan. Nathan had already helped me secure my finances. Every joint account had been closed, and I had transferred the remaining funds into my personal account. Claire had no access to the money she had once used so freely, including the funds she had spent on Ryan. Next, I contacted Alan, the private investigator, to put the final pieces into place. He had gathered more than enough evidence to prove Claire's infidelity, not just to me, but to her employer as well. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" Alan asked. "I'm sure," I said without hesitation. That afternoon, I anonymously sent a dossier of evidence to Claire's HR department. Her affair with Ryan, who was a client of her firm, was a direct violation of their code of conduct. I didn't stop there. I also sent a carefully curated email to key figures in her professional network, including her colleagues and close friends. The email contained just enough information to raise questions about her integrity without coming across as overtly vindictive. By the time Claire returned from running errands, the fallout had already begun. I was sitting on the couch when her phone buzzed repeatedly with incoming notifications. She glanced at the screen and froze, her face turning ashen. "What did you do?" she asked, her voice trembling. I looked up from the book I was reading. "What do you mean?" "My HR department just emailed me," she said, her hands shaking. "They're launching an investigation. They have photos." I set the book down, my expression calm. "That's unfortunate." She stared at me, realization dawning. "You did this. You're trying to ruin me." "No, Claire," I said, standing up. "You ruined yourself. I'm just making sure everyone sees the truth." She stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. The next phase of my plan involved Ryan. Alan had dug up enough dirt on him to destroy his reputation, and I intended to use it. That evening, I sent Ryan a text from a burner phone, posing as a compliance officer from Claire's firm. "Mr. Ryan, we need to discuss your involvement in a sensitive matter regarding Claire. Failure to cooperate could result in legal action." He responded almost immediately, agreeing to meet me at a secluded bar downtown. When I arrived, Ryan was already there, nervously sipping a drink. He didn't recognize me when I approached his table, which gave me the upper hand. "You must be Ryan," I said, sitting down across from him. He frowned. "Who are you?" "Luke," I said simply. His face drained of color. "Claire's husband?" I nodded, leaning forward. "You and I need to have a little chat," Ryan stammered, trying to explain himself, but I cut him off. "Save it. I don't care about your excuses. What I do care about is the fact that you've been using my wife to cover your gambling debts and prop up your failing reputation. That ends now." "I didn't." "Spare me the lies," I snapped, pulling out a folder containing everything Alan had uncovered about him. "This is you, right? The gambling, the lawsuits, the creditors banging on your door? Do you think Claire will stick around when she finds out what you're really like?" Ryan sat back, his hands trembling. "What do you want?" "End the affair. Leave her alone. And if I so much as hear your name again, I'll make sure this information finds its way to every corner of your professional network." He nodded quickly, his eyes wide with fear. "Fine. It's over." I leaned back, satisfied. "Good. Now get out of my sight." Ryan left without another word, and I returned home, knowing I had taken another step toward dismantling the life Claire thought she could have without consequence. That night, Claire received a text from Ryan, ending things abruptly. She stared at her phone, her expression a mixture of confusion and despair. "What's wrong?" I asked mockingly as I walked past her. "Nothing," she muttered, her voice barely audible, but I knew the truth. The web was tightening, and Claire was starting to feel the weight of her actions. Claire's world was unraveling, and the cracks in her once perfect facade were growing deeper by the day. She barely spoke to me anymore, her silence punctuated only by the occasional sound of her phone buzzing with messages. Messages that, more often than not, left her looking more frazzled than before. It wasn't long before she stopped trying to hide her frustration. One evening, after a particularly tense dinner, she threw her phone down on the table with enough force to rattle the silverware. "They suspended me at work," she blurted out, her voice a mixture of anger and panic. "They're investigating some nonsense claim about an inappropriate relationship with a client." I raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. That's terrible, I said calmly. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. Her eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering across her face. You don't seem very upset about it. What do you want me to say, Claire? I asked, leaning back in my chair. You've been distant for months, lying about where you've been and who you've been with. Maybe you should have thought about how your actions might catch up with you. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. You're unbelievable, she snapped, storming out of the room. I didn't follow her. I had no intention of offering comfort to the woman who had spent months betraying me. The next few days were a masterclass in poetic justice. Claire's company launched a formal investigation into her conduct, placing her on unpaid leave while they reviewed the evidence. I knew exactly what they would find: emails, texts, and financial records that painted a clear picture of her unprofessional relationship with Ryan. To make matters worse, her social circle was starting to turn on her. The anonymous email I had sent to her close friends and colleagues was doing its job, sowing seeds of doubt and exposing the cracks in the image Claire had so carefully curated. One by one, her friends stopped calling. Social invitations dried up. Even her closest confidants began to distance themselves, unwilling to be associated with the scandal that was quickly becoming public knowledge. It wasn't just her professional life that was falling apart. Ryan's abrupt departure left her reeling. He had taken a sudden job transfer to Seattle, cutting off all contact with Claire in the process. I knew he wouldn't stick around. Men like him never did. I watched it all unfold with a detached sense of satisfaction. Claire had built her life on lies and manipulation, and now she was facing the consequences. One evening, as I sat in my office reviewing the final draft of our divorce papers, Claire knocked on the door. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice quiet and hesitant. I looked up, gesturing for her to sit down. She hesitated before taking a seat across from me, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "I know I've made mistakes," she began, her voice trembling. "But all of this, it's too much. I'm losing everything, Luke. My job, my friends, my reputation." I stared at her, my expression unreadable. "And whose fault is that?" She flinched as though I had struck her. "I know I hurt you," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. "I was selfish and stupid, and I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I need to know, are you the one behind all of this?" I leaned forward, my hands clasped on the desk. "Claire, you did this to yourself. You lied, you cheated, and you put our entire life together at risk. All I've done is make sure the truth came to light. If that's too much for you to handle, that's not my problem." She broke down, sobbing into her hands. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of pity for her, but it quickly faded. Claire's tears didn't absolve her of her actions, and they certainly didn't erase the months of pain and betrayal she had put me through. After a few moments, she composed herself enough to ask, "What do you want from me?" "I want you to sign the divorce papers," I said, sliding them across the desk. "No contest, no arguments. You'll keep what's in your personal account, and I'll take everything else." She stared at the papers, her hands trembling. "I don't have a choice, do I?" "No," I said flatly. "You don't." She nodded, defeated, and signed the papers without another word. The next morning, I met with Nathan to finalize the filing. "She's signed everything," I told him. "Make sure it's airtight. I don't want her coming back for more." Nathan nodded, a satisfied look on his face. "You've handled this well, Luke. Most people would have lost their heads in your situation." "Losing my head wouldn't have fixed anything," I replied. "This is the only way to make sure she understands the cost of betrayal." By the time the divorce was officially finalized, Claire had lost everything: her job, her friends, her lover, and her husband. She moved into a small apartment across town, a far cry from the life of luxury she had once enjoyed. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she was struggling to make ends meet, her reputation in ruins, and her social circle all but non-existent. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of closure. Claire's isolation wasn't just a punishment for what she had done. It was a reminder that actions have consequences. It was a quiet evening when her letter arrived. I'd just returned home from work, ready to pour myself a drink and enjoy the peace that had finally settled over my life. Claire had been out of my orbit for weeks, Our divorce finalized and the remnants of our shared life scattered like ashes. The envelope was unremarkable, addressed in her familiar handwriting. For a moment, I considered tossing it straight into the trash. But curiosity got the better of me. I opened the letter and began to read. Luke, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need to say this. I owe you an apology, not just for the affair, but for everything. For the lies, the betrayal, and for taking you for granted. When we got married, I thought I knew what I wanted. I thought I knew who I was. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of everything that mattered. You didn't deserve what I did to you. I know you won't believe me, but Ryan wasn't worth it. He was a mistake, one I made out of selfishness and stupidity. And now, he's gone. My job is gone. My friends are gone. Everything I thought I wanted has disappeared, and I have no one to blame but myself. I see now that I underestimated you. I thought I could control the narrative, spin things in my favor, and come out unscathed. But you were smarter than I ever gave you credit for. You saw through me, and you made sure I paid the price. I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. Truly, Claire. The words blurred on the page as I finished reading. I set the letter down on the counter and stared at it, waiting for some kind of reaction. Anger, satisfaction, maybe even pity. But all I felt was indifference. Claire's regret, while genuine, came far too late. Her apology didn't erase the months of deceit or the pain she had caused. And it certainly didn't change the fact that she had made her choices and was now living with the consequences. I filed the letter away in a drawer, alongside the divorce papers and the other relics of our failed marriage. It wasn't worth more of my energy. The next day, I received an update from a mutual acquaintance who still kept tabs on Claire. She was struggling, her financial situation worsening by the day. The small apartment she had moved into was already proving too expensive, and she had been forced to sell off her remaining valuables to make ends meet. Her attempts to rebuild her professional life had been equally fruitless. Word of her affair with Ryan, and the workplace scandal it had caused, had spread far and wide, making it nearly impossible for her to find a new job. Employers didn't want to take a chance on someone whose reputation was so tarnished. Even her gym membership had been revoked after I anonymously shared her behavior with the owner. It was petty, perhaps, but it felt like justice. Claire's world had shrunk to the confines of her small apartment and the judgmental stares of those who still recognized her in public. She was a pariah, a shadow of the woman who had once thought she was untouchable. For weeks, I expected her to reach out again, to call or email or show up on my doorstep begging for forgiveness. But she didn't. Perhaps she finally understood that there was no way back from what she had done. Instead, I focused on my own life. I had begun to make new connections, building a circle of friends who didn't know me as Claire's husband, but simply as Luke. I threw myself into my work, finding solace in the structure and routine it provided. One evening, as I sat on my balcony with a glass of whiskey in hand, I thought about the letter again. In a way, it was proof that I had one. Claire's remorse, her acknowledgement of my strength and intelligence, was a validation of everything I had endured. She had underestimated me, and she had paid the price for it. But as satisfying as that thought was, it didn't define me. My life wasn't about her anymore. The chapter with Claire was closed, and I had no intention of reopening it. I raised my glass to the setting sun, the warm glow of the evening sky a stark contrast to the storm I had weathered. To the past, I said quietly, before taking a long sip. The letter remained in the drawer, untouched and unread. It wasn't closure. I had found that long before Claire's words arrived. It was simply a reminder of the strength it took to rebuild after betrayal. And for that, I was grateful. The day started like any other. I went through the motions of my morning routine, sipping coffee while reviewing emails and checking my schedule. Life was simpler now. No lies, no emotional weight pulling me down. I had clarity, peace even. But today, I would put the final nail in the coffin of the life I had left behind. Claire's letter had been sitting in my drawer for weeks. I hadn't thought about it much since the night I read it. Her regrets were hers to carry, not mine. Still, the idea of leaving things unfinished gnawed at me. She had apologized, but an apology wasn't enough. Not after everything. I decided to send her a message of my own. I spent the morning preparing, carefully packaging the items that would deliver my final statement. The divorce papers, freshly notarized and officially filed, were the first to go into the envelope. I added a copy of the financial settlement, detailing how little she would walk away with. The numbers were cold and undeniable, a stark reminder of what her choices had cost her. Next, I added something symbolic, a small, broken figurine, a ceramic couple dancing, its edges jagged from where it had shattered. It was one of the few remnants of our old life that I hadn't thrown away, and it felt fitting now. Finally, I included a handwritten note, short and to the point. Claire, actions have consequences. You've faced some already, but this is the end of the road. The life we had is gone, and there's no coming back. Don't contact me again. Goodbye. Luke. The package was ready by noon. I dropped it off at the post office without hesitation, ensuring it was sent with expedited delivery. Claire would receive it the next day. That evening, as I sat on my balcony, I allowed myself a moment to reflect. This was it, the final act. After this, there would be nothing left to say, nothing left to do. Claire's name would no longer hold any power over me. The following afternoon, I received confirmation that the package had been delivered. It didn't take long for my phone to buzz with a call from an unknown number. I didn't need to answer to know who it was. She called again and again. Each time, I let it ring until it went to voicemail. Finally, a message popped up. Luke, I got your package. I don't know what you're trying to prove, but you've made your point. Please, can we just talk? I know I made mistakes, but you don't have to keep punishing me. Call me back. Please. I deleted the voicemail without listening to the rest. Later that evening, I received another call, this time from a mutual friend. Luke, I just heard from Claire, they said, their voice hesitant. She's not doing well. She said you sent her something unsettling. Unsettling? I repeated, my tone calm. I sent her the truth. If she's upset by that, it's not my problem. The friend tried to argue, but I cut them off. This isn't your concern. I've made my peace with the situation, and I suggest you let it go too. I ended the call and blocked their number. For days afterward, I wondered if Claire would try to escalate things, show up at my door or spread more lies. But she didn't. Whether it was fear, shame, or simply resignation, she stayed away. In the weeks that followed, I tied up the remaining loose ends. I sold the house we had once shared, using the proceeds to invest in a quiet property far from the city. I moved my remaining assets into an offshore account, ensuring that Claire, or anyone else, could never touch them. The final step was creating distance, not just physical, but emotional. I crafted a new identity for myself, embracing a life free from the shadows of betrayal. I deleted old photos, archived old emails, and erased every trace of Claire from my digital footprint. By the time I was settled into my new home, I felt lighter than I had in years. One evening, I received a text from a number I didn't recognize. I don't know what I expected, but I guess this is goodbye. I'm sorry for everything, Luke. I hope you find happiness. Claire. I stared at the message for a long moment before deleting it. That night, as I sat on my porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a sense of finality. Claire had tried to destroy me, but I had come out stronger. Her betrayal had been the catalyst for my transformation, and now I was free. The final blow wasn't just about ending our relationship, it was about reclaiming my life. The first morning in my new home felt like a rebirth. The city was behind me, its noise and chaos replaced by the soft sounds of nature. My new place wasn't flashy or grand like the house I had shared with Claire. It was simple, cozy, and mine. Every detail, from the creaking floorboards to the way the sunlight filtered through the windows, felt like a fresh start. I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, the warmth of the mug grounding me as I stared out at the rolling hills in the distance. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't haunted by what had happened. The ghosts of betrayal, anger, and heartbreak had finally been laid to rest. Life here moved at a slower pace, and that was exactly what I needed. My days were filled with small, satisfying routines, fixing up the house, meeting neighbors, and working on my personal projects. It was a far cry from the turmoil of my previous life, and I embraced every moment of it. The community here was different too. People introduced themselves with genuine smiles and offered to lend a hand before I could even ask. One neighbor, an older man named Frank, stopped by one afternoon with a pie his wife had baked. "Welcome to the neighborhood," he said, extending the pie with a grin. "We're glad to have you here." "Thank you," I said, accepting the pie with a nod. "It's nice to meet you, Frank." "Likewise," he replied. "If you need anything, just holler. We're a tight-knit group around here." That sense of community was something I hadn't realized I was missing. It was refreshing to be surrounded by people who didn't know me as Luke, the betrayed husband. Here, I was just Luke, the new guy in town. One afternoon, as I was painting the front porch, a voice startled me. "Need a hand?" I turned to see a woman standing at the bottom of the steps, her auburn hair catching the sunlight. She looked to be around my age, her smile warm and disarming. "Depends," I said, setting down the paintbrush. "Are you volunteering?" She laughed. "Maybe. I'm Julia, your neighbor down the road." "Luke," I said, shaking her outstretched hand. Over the next few weeks, Julia became a regular presence in my life. She'd stop by with fresh-baked bread or invite me over for coffee. Her kindness was effortless, and her company was easy. One evening, she invited me to a small dinner party at her house. I hesitated at first, unsure if I was ready to re-enter the world of social gatherings. But something about her made it hard to say no. The dinner was a modest affair, just Julia, a few of her friends, and me. The conversation flowed easily, and for the first time in years, I found myself laughing without reservation. As the night wound down, Julia walked me to the door. "I'm glad you came," she said, her voice soft. "Me too," I admitted. Our friendship deepened over the months that followed. Julia never pried into my past, and I appreciated her respect for my boundaries. She accepted me as I was, without judgment or expectation. One evening, as we sat on her porch watching the stars, she turned to me. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure," I said. "Why did you move here?" I took a deep breath, considering my answer. "I needed a fresh start," I said finally. "Things didn't work out the way I thought they would." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I think we all need a fresh start sometimes." Her words stayed with me long after I left that night. By the time the first snow fell, Julia and I had become inseparable. We spent hours talking about everything and nothing, our conversations filled with warmth and understanding. She didn't fill the void left by Claire. She created something entirely new, something better. One evening, as we sat by the fireplace in her living room, she reached over and took my hand. "Luke," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know you've been through a lot, and I don't want to rush anything, but I care about you. A lot." I met her gaze, my chest tightening. "I care about you too, Julia. More than I thought I could care about anyone again." In that moment, I realized that my new beginning wasn't just about escaping the pain of the past. It was about building a future worth looking forward to. As I walked back to my house that night, the snow crunching beneath my boots, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The betrayal and heartbreak were behind me, and for the first time, I truly believed that the best chapters of my life were still ahead. 5 years. That's how long it had been since the storm of betrayal had torn through my life, leaving me to rebuild from the ground up. As I sat on the porch of the home I had made my own, watching my twin daughters chase each other around the yard, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought me here. Life had changed in ways I never imagined. My days were no longer consumed by anger or the constant replay of painful memories. Instead, they were filled with laughter, love, and the quiet contentment of knowing I had reclaimed my story. Julia had become my anchor, her unwavering kindness and strength teaching me what it meant to truly heal. My daughters, Emma and Lily, were a source of endless joy and chaos. They had Julia's auburn hair and my stubbornness, a combination that often led to spirited debates over bedtime or who got the last cookie. They reminded me daily of how far I had come, their laughter washing away any lingering bitterness. And Claire? She was little more than a footnote in my life now, though her name still occasionally crossed my mind. I had heard through mutual acquaintances that she was still living in that small apartment, her career in ruins and her social life non-existent. She had become a cautionary tale, her once vibrant personality dulled by the weight of her own choices. There had been one final attempt at contact, a short email sent a few months after Julia and I announced our engagement. "Luke, I heard about your engagement. I just wanted to say congratulations. I'm glad you found happiness. I know I don't have the right to ask for anything, but I hope one day you can forgive me. Claire." I didn't respond. Forgiveness wasn't something I owed her. It was something I had found within myself. Forgiving her didn't mean letting her back into my life. It meant letting go of the power her betrayal once held over me. Ryan, the man who had been complicit in destroying my marriage, had also faded into obscurity. His gambling debts had caught up with him, and last I heard, he was living in another state, struggling to stay afloat. I felt no sympathy for him. Like Claire, he had made his choices. Julia once asked me if I regretted how I had handled things with Claire and Ryan. If I ever wished I had taken the high road instead of ensuring they faced the consequences of their actions. No, I had told her honestly. I needed to stand up for myself. If I hadn't, I would have been stuck in that cycle of betrayal and self-doubt forever. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life. Julia had nodded, her hand resting gently on mine. "I'm glad you did. Otherwise, we might never have found each other." That conversation stayed with me. Julia had shown me that moving forward didn't mean forgetting the past. It meant learning from it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the yard in a warm, golden glow, Emma and Lily ran up the porch steps, breathless and giggling. "Daddy, can we have ice cream after dinner?" Lily asked, her eyes wide with hope. Julia appeared in the doorway, smiling as she wiped her hands on a dish towel. "Ice cream after vegetables," she said firmly, earning a chorus of groans from the girls. I laughed, scooping Lily up into my arms. "You heard your mom. Finish your veggies first, and then we'll see." As the girls ran inside, their laughter echoing through the house, I took a moment to savor the stillness. Betrayal had once consumed me, but it no longer defined me. I had built a new life, one filled with love, laughter, and hope. The lessons I had learned were hard-earned, but they had shaped me into a stronger, wiser man. Claire's actions had been a wake-up call, forcing me to reevaluate my worth and demand better for myself. And in doing so, I had found not only healing but also a future worth fighting for. Julia stepped onto the porch, sliding her arm around my waist. "Penny, for your thoughts?" "Just thinking about how lucky I am," I said, pulling her closer. She smiled, resting her head on my shoulder as we watched the sunset together. Life wasn't perfect, no life ever was, but it was mine. And as I stood there with Julia by my side and the sounds of my daughter's laughter filling the air, I knew I had finally found the peace I had been searching for. The past was behind me, the future stretched out before me, and for the first time in years, I was truly free.